I guess you've had a chance to swim a bit and take in a little sunbathing. That's what all of us like to do when the weather like this comes. And the weatherman tells us that after we have a little cloud and a little rain, the beautiful sunshine will be back again. But it's time for your favorite cable TV show. You will, those of you who follow Voices will recall that, some 3 or 4 months ago, had a guest talking about breaking God's code. Well, that guest generated some telephone calls. So we had him back a second time. And the second visit generated additional telephone calls. As a matter of fact, a flood of calls. And so, because of the telephone calls that we received, and based on the content of those telephone calls, we invited him back to talk some more, and perhaps even more specifically about the breaking of God's code and some new information. He wrote the book, and as I understand it, he's been selling books like crazy, but he's going to talk some more about breaking God's code. And so, in a moment, my guest, Jerome Smith, author of Breaking God's Code. So stay where you are. We will be back in a moment with my guest. Straight ahead. And Jerome Smith, my guest.
It's always a pleasure.
All right. Make yourselves comfortable.
Yes, sir.
All right, you have a mic on?
Yes, sir.
Jerome, it's good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad your busy schedule allows you to visit us again. Jerome, as I said, we've had a number of telephone calls about the book, Breaking God's Code. And so we thought we'd invite you back to talk a bit more about breaking God's code. Jerome, now you've talked about it. You've been here twice, and I think you're the only guest that I've had over time that has been here 3 times.
Well,
but I guess because of the book you've written and the nature of the book,
clearly,
it's important that you come back and talk some more about what you've talked about the previous times and about the content of the book. Now, tell me, what is the book about again?
Well, if you don't believe in the Bible, the book virtually is not going to do you any good whatsoever. Mm-hmm. What the book encompasses is the same exact method used by God to induce the mere mortals to write the books of the Bible. I show you where God has done it again. Mm-hmm. And I show you where Jesus talks in writing in 1968 about the assassination of Martin Luther King, and he talks in the nation's crossword puzzles. It's a 10-day conversation, and we have got the conversation, 7 different newspapers, 7 different writers, and 7 different puzzles, all of them in the same 10-day time frame. It's never been done before in the history of mankind. In order to understand this book, you have to elevate your intelligence. And what we basically do is we talk about what's being said, and I go further than that and show you who's saying it and why they're saying it. But just to give you an indication of, Martin Luther King was assassinated on the 4th of April, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. We've got 7 different newspapers. The paper I'm going to read from now, and I have the paper here, and Art can validate everything that's in front of us, is the New York Times. And what we're working with here is just the crossword puzzles only. Mm-hmm. Okay? And what's being said in the puzzles, just like if there was a Soviet operative sending messages back home about what he's doing over in America. This is what's said in the puzzles on a day-to-day basis from the 1st till the 10th. Here's how it starts out on April the 1st, 1968. Volcano washout. Regardless of weather, come down kind of beam, prayers for a nobleman. Well, clearly, everybody realizes that in this time frame, the nobleman who needed prayers, Martin was obviously a nobleman because he won the Nobel Peace Prize, was Martin Luther King. On the 3rd of April, we see Diamond Trio challenge King. Martin was killed on the 4th. On the 5th of April, we see confused, slang, and violent disarray, social affairs. Well, this is the way it was in America the day after Martin was killed. On the 6th of April, 1968, here's what the crossword puzzle says, New York Times. Book of the Bible, Martinique volcano, decide against. Now, if we go back to the 1st of April, 1968, on this day-to-day conversation in the New York Times paper, we see volcano washout, regardless of weather, come down, kind of beam, prayers for a nobleman. On the 3rd, we see Diamond Trio challenge King. On the 5th, we see confused, slang, and violent disarray, social affairs. And on the 6th, it says right there, Book of the Bible, Martinique volcano, decide against. Well, at this point, we know Martin is already dead. So somebody, the assassin, had decided against Martin. On the 7th of April, 1968, New York Times crossword puzzle. This is what the puzzle says. Assassin, take charge, attack a problem. Wasn't Martin assassinated? Didn't somebody take charge of that particular black problem?
Yeah.
Okay, what we've done in the book is we give you a day-to-day account from the 1st to the 10th about the whole conversation leading up to the assassination and after the assassination. And the book goes on to give us our first glimpse of where we go when we die.
John, let me ask you, would you, do you suppose that there are any other predictions in those crossword puzzles?
Clearly there is, but the thing is the root of understanding this, the root of finally getting into this where you can see the conversations and understand them is Martin. Martin's the weak link, and I can explain that to you.
Well, wait a minute.
Okay.
Now, do I understand you to say that all of this is a part of God's code?
Yes.
And you have broken that code?
I have broken the code, and I'm going to show you exactly where Jesus talks in writing today. The same method used by God to induce the mere mortals to write the Bible. If you believe in the Bible, then you believe that God can achieve the feat of supernatural telepathics.
Do you believe in the Bible?
Of course I believe in it, 100%. And I believe that God induced mere mortals to write these words. And I'm going to show you where God has done it again. In the 10-day time frame, we have thrown a net over 7 different papers, 7 different writers, and 7 different puzzles that reflects one conversation, and it's the conversation about the assassination of Martin Luther King. Everyone who's read this book, and there's many of them, agrees a code has been broken about the assassination of Martin Luther King. Many of them are stuck with who's doing the talking. Some say it's the FBI. Some say it's the CIA. Some say it's the KGB. Some say it's the mafia. But I'm positive, and I can prove that this is the talking is coming from Jesus Christ and his mother, the Virgin Mary. And they not only talk about Martin, but because we can use Martin as a backdrop to develop the information that they're talking about, I can show you everything that they're talking about.
And all of this is biblically based?
No, this isn't biblically based the same way as if you would have wrote a book about O.J. Simpson in 1980. Nothing would be in the book about his trial for killing Nicole, or nothing would be in the book about his civil trial about being found guilty, okay? So this is after the Bible, and this is the biggest problem, particularly people of lesser intelligence have about religion, is that they're frozen in the past, forgetting that God is still active today and that God is doing things. Do you think that God stopped dealing with mere mortals since his Bible's been written? God's doing things after the Bible's been written. And I'm going to show you what God did in 1968, what God had to say about the assassination of Martin Luther King. And you can get this information to validate this at any library in America.
Jerome, I understand that the sale of the book is doing tremendously well, and yes, I have some questions that I need to ask you. I guess these questions have come from numerous sources, perhaps some people who have even read the book. As a matter of fact, have some folks in the audience who have read the book, and I want to ask them whether or not they agree with what you're saying.
Good.
I certainly have scanned the book. I have not read the book completely, but, well.
Do you agree code's been broken about the assassination of Martin Luther King?
I believe that you are sincere about what you're saying. Before I can give a yes or a no, I want to read the complete book, and that I have not done.
Okay.
But you said you've broken the code, and the last time you were here, or the time before, I can't remember which, we had some folks in the audience who said they had read the book.
Right.
These folks who are here tonight have said that they have read the book, and I want them to make some comment about it. But before I get to that point, I want to ask you, and I would suspect that some of our viewing audience who have an interest in this question would want to know why does Jesus allow different terrible things to happen?
Well, Jesus allows different terrible things to happen because basically he won't step in like, say, the guys are sitting there planning the Kennedy assassination.
Now, let's be clear. Let's be clear. Our viewing audience need to understand that you are not a theologian.
No.
All right.
No.
No. That's clear.
That should be obvious.
Continue with the answer to the question.
Okay. Basically, Jesus, like, say, take the Kennedy assassination, for example. Right?
Yeah.
Jesus works from the premise because of the crucifixion, and he basically was on the run ever since he was a kid. A couple pair of sandals, maybe 2 or 3 robes.
Jesus was on the run ever since he was a kid.
Yeah, from birth. King Herod sent the soldiers chasing Jesus ever since he was a kid.
Okay.
Okay, and Jesus works from the premise that the American people, by and large, are doing way better than he was. Okay, but Jesus didn't step in on these situations because Jesus is looking for the mere mortals to use their intelligence to get out of them. Okay, so then, after the assassination, okay, that Jesus felt as though that perhaps Kennedy, if he would have had a enclosed car, like the Pope Mobile or something like that, that Kennedy should have took more precautions. That's all I can say.
Well, Jerome, again, our audience needs to understand that I make no attempt to challenge your answer at this point. That's
okay.
That's another show. You're stating your opinion, and that's only your opinion.
Clearly.
And of course, we don't. I'm saying you don't state that as being gospel.
No.
But your opinion. Someone else asked, does Jesus care what religion we practice?
I don't. I just think Jesus basically wants you to worship him. I think that's what's important. I think that's why we live in a Christian nation, the most powerful nation on earth. I think that should be self-evident to the other religions, particularly like the Muslims or people who live in a rainforest or people who worship rocks or sand or things of that nature, that the most powerful nation in the world that has a Lent season, a Christmas and an Easter, that Jesus has indicated that this is the nation that is setting the tone for him. Conversation about the assassination of Martin Luther King. We've broken the code. We've got it in the nation's newspaper crossword puzzles. We've got 7 different puzzles, 7 different writers, 7 different newspapers that all reflect the same conversation about the killing of Martin. Now, what do we know about Martin that shows us that Martin has some significance or some relevance to God? 2 earthquakes, both on Martin's holiday. 1994, January 17th, Northridge, California. 61 dead, the magnitude 6.8. That's Martin Luther King's holiday. The following year, 1995, January 17th, Kobe, Japan. Another earthquake, Martin Luther King's holiday. The death toll was 5,502. The magnitude was 7.2. What else? What happened in 1996 to exalt the name Martin? Dean Martin died on Christmas Day. So we see that Martin's name is being exalted throughout the nation. Okay. I think that the Achilles heel and the key to being positively sure that the supernatural involvement in the mere moral affairs is the Megabuck Lotto. Now, the Lotto started, the first online game was played in New Jersey in 1975. It was a pick 3. The game is now being played in 38 states. The Megabuck Lotto from 1995 to 1990, 15 years in a row, the same pattern, the same profile, all the winners. The winners, none of them had a